Talk 15. Unidentified Scariel phenomena. A talk on the nature of security. The illusion of control. In this talk, we explore the nature of security. Not practical security, but the psychological security the mind tries to manufacture through control, through identity, through certainty, through status, through narrative, through belonging, through permanence, security. Again and again, beneath different situations, one question quietly repeats. What exactly are we trying to secure? And can any of it truly be secured? Because we want security. We demand certainty. Are they the same thing? We attempt to manage outcomes in order to feel safe. But life is not really controllable at that very fine scale. I was once asked by Venerable Saranankara, Chief Abbot of Central Temple, to go to Kuching, Sarawak, and to talk. It was the festival of the hungry ghosts. I agreed, and I read up in the Peta Vatu, the book called The Mansions of the Hungry Ghosts, which is in the Pali Canon. He supplied the return flight ticket, and I was there for about, 4 days, giving talks. And then, on the way back, I would be flying, but it would be middle of the night. At the end of the last talk, people gave a large stack of red envelopes. And at the time, I was trying to not touch money. But I thought, is it rude to say no? And anyway, I thought I can pass it to someone somehow usefully, and took the small stack of red ornamental envelopes and put them in my bag. I was dropped at the airport, checked in at 10 p.m. or so, and trolleyed through a largely empty Kuching airport. At the far end, there was a desk. I headed towards it. It was the only thing lit up. There was a security guard. He pointed. There was a ramp. There was an aeroplane. I went up the ramp. I sat down in the aeroplane. They came around checking the tickets. Everyone else's was a different colour ticket than mine. Oh dear. Quickly, they said, quick, down the ramp. It's along and 2 gates are long. I'd been pointed to this one by the security guard, so I was fuming and raced down, turned right, up, and there was no aeroplane there. It had already just left. It was taxiing on the airstrip. What was I going to do? There I was, in an empty airport, one slightly dim security guard, and who knows, nothing else. So I went over to him, trying to contain my rage. He had pointed me on the wrong aeroplane without checking my ticket after all. Anyway, he got the gist that I needed to find a new flight and pointed to a far distant, lonely single desk that was still open. It was some kind of airline booth. So I went over to the counter. Sure enough, there was one light, one person sitting there, and I said, "Excuse me, I just missed my flight," and began to somehow explain my tragic misdirection and the fault all being the security guards. And they said, "Oh, you can catch the one at 3:00 a.m. And I said, "Ah, okay." And they said, "But you know, that will be 300 ringgit," or whatever it was. There was no talk of bypassing this part. Wait, I realized. And so, fortunately, I was holding the money. I was holding these red ang pao, red envelopes. I opened all of them to find out the money was exactly enough for a ticket. How about that? There it was. So it was one of those beautiful moments of strange synchronicity. I paid for the ticket. What would I have done if I hadn't accepted the ang pao, the red envelopes? This story isn't about coincidence or magic luck. It illustrates how quickly our sense of security collapses when plans fail. We think control guarantees safety. Yet when certainty disappears, what actually matters is not control, but the steadiness of mind that responds. And the moral is that control is not the same as care. I had planned the journey. The flights were booked. Everything appeared organized. Yet one wrong gesture from a security guard and the entire structure collapsed. Planning is responsible. Clinging to outcome is something else. Today's theme is the nature of security, which is ironic that it was the security guard, the person paid to guard my security, who set this chain of events in motion. I should have looked and checked my gate number instead of trusting fully on the friendly, trying to be helpful, well-intended night guard. Unidentified Scariel phenomena, the racing heart of threat detection versus imagination. On one occasion, I was very, very exhausted. It was actually a full moon when I was in Chiang Mai, Thailand, at my original temple. I was really needing a break, really feeling like not being under a lot of pressure. So I spoke with my abbot, and immediately he sort of snapped his fingers or whatever and asked for a driver to take me somewhere up in a remote temple. I didn't really know where we were going. The car drove me up and up and up towards the Royal Palace Temple, which overlooks Chiang Mai. But it didn't stop there. It carried on into the depths of the heartland behind it. There were many hill tribe villages, and finally it reached one very remote valley with a temple. By then it was 6:30 or 7 o'clock in early evening. They dropped me off with my bag and left me there. I was introduced to the abbot. That was it. He said, "There's your space, there's your room." I got in. I was exhausted. One of the first things I did, as soon as I unpacked, was hit the bed and go into a deep sleep. I woke up sometime later. Could have been 10 o'clock at night. Could have been 11 o'clock. Fully refreshed. I slept for about 4 hours and felt completely renewed. So I lay there, blinking, looking at the ceiling, looking around the room. What to do? I opened the door and there was bright light everywhere. It was a full moon. So I decided, well, I'm wide awake. I'm going to go for a little walk. I can see clearly. There was a road width track that went forward along the valley. I walked along it. On one side was a deep valley going down and up the other side, full of trees. It was perfectly clear. To my left, there was a clear sky, and up there was something like a red planet, just stopped in the sky, very distinct. So it must be Mars. I casually looked the other side, and there was a hill rising to my right. There was the full moon up there, a beautiful golden moon. I noticed there were some strange shapes on the top of the ridge and some steps right where I'd stopped, leading up. It looked like some kind of sanctuary up there, some sort of temple structure. It was quite dark under the trees and bushes, but I could see the outline. The stairs led exactly up to that structure, above which was the full moon. The full moon, the temple structure, the stairs, and then the other way, Mars on the other side, are all perfectly aligned. That looks significant, I thought. I wondered if I should go up and have a look at those temple buildings. Okay, I'll go up. So I started climbing the stairs. I got about halfway and paused. There was an odd illusion. It looked like there was a sort of Lord of the Rings figure up there. Like, a hooded figure in dark robes hanging down. It looked exactly like that. I thought, that's very odd. It's actually quite scary, but no problem. I'll go a bit closer and see what it actually is. It's probably some sort of washing on a line or on a bush or a statue of some kind. So I went up steps a few more. As I got closer, it looked even more like a hooded figure standing in the middle of an open area. I thought, now that is pretty scary. And I noticed my heart started to race. I went up more steps and stopped. It was a hooded figure standing there. 2 legs, 2 feet, a sort of hooded cowl. It was slightly moving, wobbling, and it was facing my direction. There was a strange sort of smoke or mist rising from around the hood. I was scared. The hairs on my neck stood up. What is it? I thought, I've either got to run, in which case I'll probably be more scared, or I've got to find out what it is, and then I won't be scared. So with my heart racing, I went up a few more steps. I started to see 2 red dots where the eyes should be. So that was really worrying. What am I going to do? I was standing there in a moonlit area, casting a shadow, clearly wearing some kind of cloak. It was this thing. I was genuinely scared. I approached a little more. It looked even more like a hooded figure with red eyes. I went a little bit closer more. Bearing in mind I'm slightly short-sighted, I thought maybe I'll say something. I went closer and said, "Hello?" The figure went, "Woo!" It was a novice monk. It was a novice monk, a little Samanera. He had a robe over his head, and he was holding 2 little incense sticks, hoping the smoke was going to keep away the mosquitoes while he was doing his walking meditation. He'd been terrified seeing me coming up the stairs. I don't think the abbot had told him about my arrival. As far as he was concerned, I was some sort of scary, ghostly alien figure that was coming up the stairs after him. Just to show you that there's imagination and there's threat detection, and often they can come together, as they did in that moment. And the moral is that the mind hates not knowing. The most uncomfortable moment wasn't the unidentified, scariel phenomena, ghostly alien part. It was the doubt. It was the uncertainty. It was not knowing. Ambiguity. The mind prefers a wrong explanation over no explanation. We demand certainty because not knowing feels unsafe. But security, safety, and certainty are not identical. Decision fatigue. Modern overchoice as a kind of pseudo-control. So, choice can be a kind of illusion of control. The more options we are given, the more we feel we are steering our lives. Yet the multiplication of options does not necessarily increase stability. It simply increases decision-making. That can simply lead to anxiety and indecision through overload. Modern society does make a huge virtue of freedom. Freedom of choice. You are free to choose. The assumption is that more choice equals more security, more control, more agency, perhaps more identity. This was brought to my attention during a visit to Singapore, where a hosting supporter bombarded me non-stop with choices about everything. Where to eat, what cuisine, which drink, which dessert, what variation, what option. It felt generous, yet oddly exhausting. Would you like this or this? Would you like that or the other? Would you like mild cheddar cheese or strong cheddar or Italian? Would you like that grated or block? It was strangely confusing and disorienting. When I was in Thailand training, we accepted all food without hardly looking at it. After 3 years, I actually hardly knew any of the names for any kind of food. The food items were hardly commented on. Years later, I was a layman in London, and an excited person, hearing I'd been in Thailand, was introduced to me, and they, having visited Thailand, wanted to remember and recite the names of all the Thai food menu items they knew and check with me. When it turned out I knew almost none of the names of any food, they turned deeply suspicious and suspected I was lying about having been in Thailand at all. How much is that doggy in the window? Previously to reordaining in 2010, I was working largely with one sound company that provided sound equipment for very high-end banquets and expensive events. So I got used to the world of sound and events, and I was looking forward to vanishing into the deepest part of Burma, where there was an intensive silent retreat. 16 hours of meditation a day for 60 days. I knew it was going to be very tough psychologically. So I trained myself in Sri Lanka, practicing 14 hours a day of intensive meditation for a long time to get ready and build up the mental strength. When I arrived in Myanmar and was taken to Bago Forest, it was somewhat of a shock to discover that I was going to be confronted with a different kind of challenge than I was expecting. Firstly, there was a week-long wedding happening in the neighboring field, which had an enormous PA system. So far from it being a silent, disciplined retreat, we were flooded with Burmese pop music, non-stop, day and night, because of the wedding. Not having brought any earplugs, it was a great challenge. Next, the center of the temple in Bago Forest has a tower, and they have 4 PAs of their own facing in different directions. So on top of this neighboring party music 24/7, we had the alarm call, the temple bell, telling you it was time to wake up, time to go to the hall, time for breakfast, time for lunch, and time for all the other different things. They had a digital sample of some strangely, really irritating bells like church bells or something like that. I got really fed up with that. Having become irritated, one day I decided to do something a little bit sneaky, I have to admit, and it was probably slightly unethical. Next to the tower of the bell speaker system, there was a book on a table where yogis could make comments, requests, and complaints of any kind. So what I did was complain about the bell in about 8 different handwritings. Okay, it's sneaky, it's bordering on deception, but I have to say it was worth it for a while. They changed the bell sound. But guess what they changed it to? They changed it to Big Ben from London ringing out. So now, just because of my sneaky action where I wrote the complaints, could you change the bells in about 8 different people's handwritings and using a different pen to make it look like lots of people were complaining about it? They changed it to the bells of Big Ben. I was free from England and away in Asia, and suddenly, every few hours, I had to listen to Big Ben, the chimes of Westminster Abbey from central London. On top of that, there wasn't a clock working in the meditation hall at first, and there wasn't one in our sleeping compound area either. So they went out and bought a load of clocks and started putting them up everywhere. In Myanmar, most of the clocks seem to be imported from China, and they're usually the cheaper type. So what happened was they had one which rang its alarm chime every 15 minutes, and they put this in the main meditation hall where you were meditating for 16 hours. Every 15 minutes, the alarm would chime a tune. Slightly out of tune. You might know it. How much is that doggy in the window? The one with the waggly tail. It's a tune. Every 15 minutes. Now, bearing in mind that for at least the previous 10 years or more, most part of 15 to 20 years, I had trained as a musician. My ears were micro-tuned to the most subtle and fussiness of tuning and sound. And this, how much is that doggy in the window, would play slightly out of tune, slightly flat, and slightly slowing down as it repeated the theme every time, every 15 minutes, every 15 minutes. And the moral here is quieter. It's just as sharp, though. I went to the forest to control the conditions of my mind. I thought silence would guarantee depth. I trained for endurance, expecting hardship of one kind, and meant a different kind altogether. Noise instead of silence, digital bells instead of stillness. Even my attempt to manage the environment only created new disturbances. We attempt to arrange conditions in order to feel secure, but security does not come from perfect surroundings. Life does not obey our spiritual design plans. The lesson was not how to eliminate sound, but how to remain steady within it. Silence is not certainty. Stability is not control. The Big Bang Theory. Sometimes you can be expecting sounds, and sometimes there's a lot of pressure. Musicians and sound artists know about this. There was a time I was in London, and my job was to be the sound effects man. It was in a theatre, in a training show in King's Cross, London. Now, this was a very interesting play. It was about a lady who had a relationship with Adolf Hitler. It was a true story. There was a group of sisters called the Mitford sisters. One of them, the youngest one, was called Unity Mitford. She decided that the love of her life was Adolf Hitler, and she was convinced that the unification of Germany and England through him, through Adolf Hitler's merging with England, was going to be the best thing that ever happened, and that her love for him was the best thing that could ever happen too. Long story short, it was a play about the story of her life. I had to play sound effects all the way through from inside the sound booth. I had them all lined up, one after another. Mostly, it started with lots of German marching band music. These were all recordings on a CD disc. Mostly, it started with brass bands, boots marching, lots of things like that. Lots of other sounds. Press the button, birds tweeting. Press the button, restaurant music. And in an Austrian restaurant. Press the button, other kinds of sound effects as well. At the peak moment, at the end of the play, after months and months of rehearsal, every precise detail controlled, Unity Mitford realizes that Adolf Hitler is extremely bad news. When she comes to this realization, while she's in Berlin, she goes to a park, sits on a bench, pulls out a revolver, places it against her forehead, and pulls the trigger. At that moment, the guy in the sound booth presses the button which makes the sound of the revolver going off effect, and she collapses forward. Lights go down, it's the end of the play, and the audience claps. So imagine my horror as the sound guy pressing the button when instead of the bang of a revolver going off, what came out was the sound of a marching band. Months of rehearsals all came crashing down on me as I failed miserably to press the right button at the right time. It was a nightmare. The director, a wonderful guy, actually just brushed it off. It was one of the most merciful things I ever came across. And it showed me the stature of his character that he was able to do that. A younger person and a lesser person would have been trying to strangle me for ruining the whole event. It was really an experience of how we deal with control and how the sense of safety that comes from everything going according to plan often fails. Things do not behave exactly the way we designed. And the moral is, we rehearse life as if pressing the right buttons will guarantee the right outcome. We line up our cues, we refine the sequence, we assume that precision equals safety, but control at that level is fragile. One wrong button and the illusion collapses. Security is not the certainty that everything will unfold as scripted. It is the steadiness to meet the marching band when we expected a bang. Life is not controllable at that resolution. What matters is not perfect execution, but the mind that remains balanced when the sound comes out wrong.